particularly for men. The thought of phoning up a stranger and opening up about your mental health over the telephone is a really tough thing to do, quite rightly.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, a hospitality-specific podcast dedicated to challenging mental health stigma and conversations designed to inspire a new, healthier, happier, and more sustainable hospitality profession. The Burnt Chef Journal is proudly sponsored by Planday, the workforce management system that helps your business give a shift. From scheduling rotas ahead to tracking time and attendance, managing your team's careers to managing your budgets, Planday has everything you need to make your day work in one easy-to-use platform. Try it yourself with a 30-day free trial only at planday.com. Get your shift together with Planday. Okay, so this week I am joined by Alice Hendy MBE, who is the CEO and founder of multi-award-winning Times32 Tech for Good, and also Ripple, the suicide prevention charity as well. So Alice, thank you ever so much for joining me this week.
Hi, Kris. Thank you so much for having me.
Good. No, pleasure. It's Monday morning here and a very sort of drab Monday in the UK. Whereabouts in the world are you?
So I'm down in Portsmouth on the south coast, very drab, very cold, hence why I'm in kind of ski gear at my computer. So yeah, heating's on, very cold down here.
Heating's on full. I think we've finally reached that time of the year, haven't we? Although it's a little bit later in the year than I would say normally when it comes down to this sort of temperature.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I've tried to hold out as long as I possibly can before I put the heating on, but I've had to go there. I've had to go there now.
I know. Well, it sounds like an absolute luxury. I live in a farmhouse with no central heating. So it's just extra pairs of socks and jumpers come this time of year, and a fire in the living room. It's the only thing that you sort of huddle around to keep warm. Yeah, talk about resilience building. It's definitely that.
Huge. Yeah, huge. I hope you've got some jumpers in that room with you. You've only got a t-shirt at the moment.
I know, it's because I accidentally left the heating on when I left the office yesterday. As I say, I was working, repairing some tech issues, and I accidentally left it on, which was a pleasant surprise. But actually, when I came in today, it was boiling.
Hot, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, Alice, I mean, you have an incredible story and an incredible charity and background as well. And the impact that you've been driving through the charity is nothing short of tremendous. For listeners who haven't come across you before or heard you speak or understand what Ripple is, are you able just to sort of explain a little bit of a backstory about how you got into the world of mental health and specifically suicide prevention?
Yeah, sure. So really my journey really began in November of 2020. So it was Wednesday, the 25th of November. So we were in the middle of COVID at that point. Lots of people feeling pretty isolated, pretty lonely, and it just wasn't a great time. There was lots of lockdowns going on, and we didn't know whether we were going to have kind of Christmas time coming up and that kind of thing. So it wasn't great for any of us. Personally, for me at that stage in life, it was also pretty rubbish. I was in the middle of a divorce at that time. I was in the middle of selling my family home, and I'd moved back in with my parents to try and kind of rebuild. So personally, it wasn't great either. However, little did I know that stuff that I was going through just paled into insignificance in terms of what was about to come. So on that Wednesday, the 25th of November, we got a knock at the door at 5:28 in the morning, and 2 police officers were stood in front of us. They asked to come in, and they proceeded to tell my parents and I that about 2 hours prior, in the early hours of that morning, they had found somebody that they believe had taken their own life, and they'd identified that person as being my brother, Josh. So yeah, life for my parents and I from that moment just changed forever. Josh was my only sibling. He was 21 when he took his life. And in the immediate aftermath of losing him, I became just obsessed with going through all of his devices in order to try and find answers. You know, why did he take his life? What was the reasoning behind it? What was so bad that he thought this was his best option? And when I did that, and when I went through his phone and his tablet and his laptop and so on, I found that he had been, probably for about 2 months prior, he'd been going on the internet and searching for how we could end his life. And it was those searches that were giving Josh access to really harmful content and harmful material, instructions on how he could end his life, step-by-step guidance on methods of suicide, tips, encouragement. He was even given pain scales for each method of suicide to help him make a decision as to what method to pick. I just could not believe that this kind of material existed on the internet. And this isn't stuff, that you have to go on the dark web for. This is kind of readily available stuff that anyone can access. And so that really prompted me to come up with this idea called Ripple. And ultimately, it tries to solve that issue. It tries to intervene and intercept anybody out there who's that low and that desperate that are conducting those harmful searches, and instead redirect them down a more hopeful path.
Well, thank you for sharing that experience. I know that in our line of work, we talk about our own personal experiences on a regular basis, but it doesn't make it any less difficult and less painful. So I appreciate that. I suppose having had experience with suicidal thoughts myself, and also having rescued people who are at immediate risk of this as well, what was your thought process when you started going through the material on the devices and the laptop? Like, was this the first time that you'd sort of come across this subject matter and sort of delved into this?
Yeah. So my day job alongside Ripple, I work full time in cybersecurity. So I'm used to seeing some horrible stuff on the internet, to be honest, and dealing with horrible people. It's very standard for me day to day. Honestly, I'd never come across this stuff before. I'd never, ever come across or seen any material where people are actively encouraging somebody to end their life. And I still can't fathom how that is a thing, in all honesty, and a frequent thing as well. This is happening every day for people who are subject to this kind of material on social media, on Google searches, on gaming platforms. And the people out there that are putting this material out there for people to have a look at, again, I can't really fathom it. So wasn't something I'd ever come across before. I took it upon myself really to just immerse myself in it, to see what it was all about, why people do it. Still don't really have an answer. All I know is I need to get to these people before they reach some of this harmful material in an attempt to take them down a different path, a different route.
Yeah. I mean, it's beggars belief how anyone can promote this. It's almost like a cult, a cult.
Yeah.
One of the strangest things. I mean, we have a family member who lost their daughter, and she wasn't in this country. And there was almost like a woman who was promoting ways of ending life. It was like a cult thing. And this apparently wasn't the first thing. And it's just, I like yourself, I can't get my head around what it is that drives people to want to do that in the first place. Like, why would you want to promote something that's so terrible?
I think there's also the stark reality of comments and things on social media behind a keyboard. People think it's okay to say stuff without any consequence of what they're saying, and without any knowledge actually of the impact that their words have on other people. And we see it, don't we, every single day with comments that people write to celebrities or, media personalities and so on. But it does go right down to a normal member of the public. This does happen on a daily basis. It kind of opens up a wider conversation, doesn't it, really, in terms of what more can we do in the world of online safety. We've got the online safety bill coming out in the UK in the middle of 2025. Great. It will certainly go some way to helping mitigate and manage what happens on the internet. It doesn't go really far enough in order to protect our loved ones, but certainly it's a step in the right direction. But then we've got issues around certain social media platforms that are spreading hate and so on that are just not moderated. And it's okay to do that. So it's a worry. It's a real worry. And anybody who uses social media and goes on the internet, which, let's be honest, is the majority of us, unfortunately, is subject to this stuff.
Yeah. We and I have had a significant level of, you get it even on your ads promoting your impact work. Yeah, people are like, yeah, what are you really doing? Like, even on LinkedIn the other day, one of the followers I put up, and I was talking on ITV about the work that we were doing. And one, he must have looked at the first 3 seconds of the video. Two, never bothered to look at the website. And the comment was, yeah, but what are you actually doing there? You're not actually doing anything that drives impact. And you're like, this is a professional platform. And you've not even taken the time to research this. So based on your work in cybersecurity, have you seen an increase in this anger and this lack of emotional intelligence and thought process when it comes down to these sort of comments and the behaviors that you're seeing online?
Hugely. And it isn't even just to do with self-harm and suicide. It's across the board. It's just across the board. It's around politics. It's even around sports teams and football results and rugby results. You know, some of these comments that just get posted out, you just cannot believe that somebody feels okay in sending these kinds of things to people. And like you, I've been subject to trolling. When I first started Ripple, I had to come off of what was then Twitter because my charity was being trolled on Twitter. And I was getting comments saying, oh, you know, I wish you just do what your brother did. What are you doing? Your brother took his life, so obviously you're really rubbish, sister. Just go and do what he did kind of thing. And what are you doing? Wasting everyone's time. And it was those kinds of comments that I thought, this isn't good for my mental health here. So I come off of the platform completely. Yeah, so as well as seeing these comments firsthand and seeing what people are subject to, I've also been on the other side of it where I've actually received them myself, like you guys. And it's very demoralizing when all we're trying to do is help people.
Yeah, and that's perhaps a conversation for another day on what drives people to be absolute knobs online.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a left and a right sort of division. It's becoming a lot more noticeable now. So what is it in terms of suicide? So we launched suicide first aid training almost a year ago today. We have not run out a single course of suicide first aid, despite advertising it, despite the fact of the moral and, as we discussed earlier, the fiscal benefits of being more aware and knowledgeable to this service. What is it that is stopping people at the moment from engaging with this such an important subject?
So we touched on this before we hit record earlier today, but in my opinion, the topic of suicide is still so stigmatized that people are running away from the subject and the word. And we've gone over the last few years through a stage or a transition where talking about mental health has become more accepted. We've seen a huge uplift in the number of businesses who are recognizing mental health as an illness, who are training their staff to be mental health first aiders, and who are noticeably trying to make a difference in that space of mental health. Great. When it comes to suicide and suicide prevention and suicide first aid, we're about 5 or 6 years behind the curve of mental health, in my opinion, because it's the word that people just don't want to talk about. They are scared of it. They don't know how to react to people who openly would have the bravery and the courage to say, I'm experiencing suicidal thoughts. And it's an area where we desperately need to change the narrative to make people more comfortable with it, because the reality is that this is happening. The chances are whoever it is watching this podcast would have been impacted by suicide in one way or another. You would know somebody who's taken their own life or would have experienced suicidal thoughts yourself, without a doubt. We need to change the narrative and make it more acceptable to talk about. But we've got a long way to go. Yeah,
it is. It's a battle, and it's a war that you and I and other mental health and wellbeing charities and NGOs and psychologists are fighting. But it is interesting. I think when I check in with myself and we train in a 3-hour awareness session, we train about suicide. We don't spend enough time on it, if I'm honest. But you can see, first and foremost, eyes glazing over when the word's mentioned, and body language is really starting to shift and change. But what I'm most curious about is, I've been doing this almost 6 years myself now, and even my nervous system, when the word suicide is mentioned, is still firing off. It feels nasty. And I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to change the dynamics and change the way of a subject matter that historically has been so heavily stigmatized. I mean, in the back of, was it 80s? It was illegal at one stage. Like if you attempted to take your life and then you were found, it was a crime, right? And
hugely. And the other thing is the cultures are so different around the world as well. And it's also to do with language. You just mentioned suicide hasn't been a crime for years and years, yet we still use the term committed suicide. We don't commit cancer. We don't commit a stroke. We shouldn't therefore commit suicide. Somebody instead has died by suicide. It's subtle changes like that that could help reduce the stigma surrounding the topic. That's just one very minor example. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's crazy in terms of the stigma that still surrounds this topic, and the fact that when the word is mentioned, people almost recoil and don't know how to deal with it, don't know how to respond, don't know what to say to you.
Yeah. I think it should be a prerequisite, personally, that everyone should have training in terms of identifying the signs, having empathic conversations. And most importantly as well, what I find quite interesting is that people who don't know what the signposting and what the next steps are, whether it's someone's in immediate crisis or maybe they're having thoughts and feelings that come and go and they're not in immediate harm, they don't have a plan. But again, people aren't aware of what to do in those situations. And if you're not aware, similarly to like physical first aid, if you don't know what to do if someone's had a heart attack, you probably should be taking the time to learn this, because, or the early stages of a stroke, for example, the sooner you get intervened with that, the less likely the person is to have longer term damage. But it's the same with mental health issues, and the subject of suicide is quite prevalent with that. So in terms of data, I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet. Can I share? Am I able to share it with you in terms of ONS?
Yes, okay. Of course. Is it the right time for me now to tell you I used to work for them?
Perfect. Brilliant. Then hopefully you're able to answer my bee, or at least put it to rest. So I look, similarly probably to yourself, we look at all the research data from universities, and ONS is one of the big guiding, this is the number of people who we've had deaths registered by suicide, right? And I look at that, and I look at the work that we're doing and the number of cases that we hear about, and just within our organization, and bear in mind, we're still growing. We don't cover the 72 million people worldwide. And I compare that to the stats and I go, so far off. Like, there's no way we should hear about a significant proportion within our sector specifically. And when you compare it to ONS, although the numbers are rising still and they're the highest they've been in ages, are they accurate? And if not, why?
So they're the most accurate we're going to get, I think, is the first thing to say. But there is loads and loads of things that could be skewing those statistics. For example, underreporting, I think, is an issue. And I've spoken to many, many families where this is the case, where quite clearly their loved one has taken their own life, but it's been recorded formally as an accident, as an example. Mm-hmm. And there are hundreds and hundreds of examples like that. It doesn't look great on a country if they've got high suicide rates. A typical example of this would be Japan, where the culture over there around the topic of suicide is extremely different to that of the culture in the UK. Over there, it is very much frowned upon. There is enormous stigma over there. There's even fines that happen that are given to loved ones of the person who's taken their own life. That's the kind of level we're at in Japan. Now, they have, without doubt, the highest suicide rate in the world, but their figures are significantly underreported because they don't want to put out, that their country has got a problem. So in answer to your question, I'd say, in my personal opinion, that there would absolutely be some differences there. That would mean that the stark reality is very different to what we see in the figures and the numbers, but it's the best source of data that we've got in the UK, without a doubt.
Yeah, it is challenging, really challenging, especially when you're looking at other countries as well, and you're seeing that we're all sort of benchmarking ourselves against other, but it could be an RTC, or it could be, the use of drugs or alcohol, whatever it might be. And I think that's something that, at some stage when we have the capacity, I'd love to be able to campaign in terms of trying to get this data updated. So what are some of the key stats, not just in the UK, but any information that you have globally that really drives this point home to individuals of how much of a serious problem this is currently?
So one of the stats that stands out to me and my work in online safety with Ripple is to do with the internet. And that is the fact that every single month, there are 1.2 million internet searches that are carried out around the world where people are typing in how to end their life every single month. If somebody wants to find the answer to something, they now go on the internet usually in order to find it. And it's no different, sadly, with the topic of self-harm and suicide. Now, my brother was one of those 1.2 million a month, and it's increasing. It's only getting worse. So that for me is really what drives me from an online safety point of view, to try to intervene and interrupt people at that pivotal moment of crisis. And instead of them looking at this material that, my brother was looking at and getting these instructions and tips and encouragement, instead they're actually faced with support options. Where can they actually go now, immediately, for free, to get the help that they need and that they deserve? So I'd say that's a biggie. And the other one, which really stands out to me, and the reason I'm saying this is because we're talking about sectors, and it's a nice pivot into your world, Kris, in a moment as well. Construction is one of the sectors as well, which has got such a huge problem. And the statistic of 2 men a day take their lives in the construction industry makes me feel sick that happens on a daily basis. It's just unbelievable. And it shines a light, one of many sectors that needs more work, hospitality being another.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful to Ripple for the work that you pioneered in actually shining a spotlight on this. For 4 years, I've been searching the internet for research papers and studies on this particular subject matter, because it's something that personally means a lot to me. And there's nothing out there. Like, the only other research piece I found was Australia, where it said that male chefs specifically are 1.4 times more likely to die by suicide than other professions. But there is such a distinct lack of information out there with regards to sector-specific issues that the work that we've done together is really, really poignant. Are you able just to highlight some of the main bits from a hospitality perspective that we did?
Honestly, Kris, I don't have it in front of me.
That's okay. I mean, I think the first thing to say about this is it was 2,000 respondents, which is not a small number in terms of data.
No, it's a big sample size for sure.
Yeah, massive, massive, massive. And I think the interesting thing, the sort of one of the key headlines is that it was just under 70% of people were struggling or had experienced, and the most sector-specific study on this particular subject matter that's been conducted in the world, or that I've found to date. If you're enjoying this week's episode, consider heading over to our website and supporting our ongoing work in destigmatizing mental illness and creating a healthier, happier, and more sustainable industry by purchasing some of our branded merchandise. We have a whole range of t-shirts, hoodies, chef's jackets, well-being journals, plus a whole host more available on worldwide dispatch. All funds raised from sales of these items go towards free-to-access e-learning content, as well as providing free support systems and help for those who may be experiencing difficulty with their mental health.
And what, Kris, from your work at the Burnt Chef Project, what would you say are the key risk factors in hospitality workers that impact mental health and suicidal thoughts from your perspective?
Great question. First and foremost, it is chronic and severe levels of stress. It's the use of self-coping mechanisms such as substances and alcohol. And then it's also the culture within this environment. Similarly, I guess, to construction, hospitality historically has been quite male-dominated, quite male-heavy, certainly from a back-of-house perspective. And we know through stories, and we know through even TV shows, etc., that it's been like a just man-up culture, which means if you are struggling with thoughts of suicide or self-harm, you're not likely to be in an environment where you can ask for support and for help historically, although that is improving. And I think all of those three things, the stigma, the self-coping mechanisms, the high levels of stress, the being tired.
I think unsociable hours comes into it as well, Kris.
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, we know for a fact, based on science, it messes with your circadian rhythm and your sleep patterns, etc., which has a big impact on how you feel in terms of your physical and mental health. I also think it's really challenging to connect with someone at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
It's not like you can phone up a friend or a buddy and be like, look, I'm having these dark thoughts. I don't know what to do, but I do need some assistance, because it's a lot of the time when other people are asleep, which is why provisions such as the work that we do with Shout, the 24-hour text support service in the UK, and then the global therapy and triage service that we've put in place for free recently are so vital, because it does give that opportunity. And I think that from recent data, we had 8% of the messages and calls that we get come through are related to suicide.
Really?
Yeah, which is, it's a significant chunk. Anxiety, stress, and depression being quite high. But you also look at, I think, when you're looking at busy sectors like hospitality, if you're having marital disputes, if you're having financial problems, you don't often tend to get a great deal of time historically to deal with those as well. So not only are you turning up to work with presenteeism in play, but also you've got the debt behind you. You've got the marital issues. You've got, perhaps you don't have access to your children as frequently. And this can seem quite overwhelming, I think. So I would say those are probably the driving factors.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a combination of all of the above.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is to provide some information to individuals, both from a supportive point of view and also from a self-help point of view. So if someone is currently experiencing waves or thoughts of suicide, they're not perhaps at immediate risk and they don't have a current plan in terms of searching harmful content, for example. What are some of the steps that those individuals can take to fight through that stigma, reach out for help, or get help for themselves through GP services? What is it that they can do first and foremost?
So I think a really important message here for me to try and hit home is that it's not just telephone lines that exist and telephone helplines that exist, because particularly for men, the thought of phoning up a stranger and opening up about your mental health over the telephone is a really tough thing to do, quite rightly. So although those platforms do exist, like you've just mentioned, GP, Samaritans, Papyrus, lots of amazing telephone lines out there. Calm is another one. There are a huge number of other services that exist alongside those platforms in a variety of different ways, which means that you can get mental health support in a way that suits you and resonates with you. So, for example, there are, as you mentioned, there's tech support that you can get through Shout. There is web chat facilities that you can access through Calm, which is open every single day for men. There's also apps that you can download as well on your phone in a really subtle, discreet way. For example, the Hub of Hope, where you put your postcode in and it will come up with a range of different resources and support services in your vicinity that you can access and utilize. There's another app called Stay Alive, which is from a charity called Grassroots, who are based down in Brighton. Their app is amazing. You can build safety plans in there. There's podcasts you can listen to. There's articles you can read. It's packed full of resources to help you manage how you're doing on a day-to-day basis. There's also another platform that you could use. It's called Click, CLIC, and it's a forum, but it's a forum that's moderated 24 hours a day by mental health professionals. And it's where you can connect with people that are going through the same stuff that you're going through. And that might be a way, actually, that you can get mental health support as well. So I guess one of the key things really that I wanted to mention here is that there is so much support out there, and it might not just be in the ways that you immediately think of. There's a huge amount of stuff out there, and one of them will resonate with you.
Yeah. I think you take it for granted in this space, don't you? We're aware of these services. It's our job to be aware of these services. But someone who may be experiencing mental illness and certainly subject like suicide, for example, for the first time, who may not have the knowledge or understanding of well-being, or they certainly weren't taught at school about it. Back in, we were taught that PE keeps your lungs and your heart strong, but we weren't taught about the fact that we had mental health or emotional intelligence back at school now. And I'm pleased to say that is starting to change. But they don't have that repository of information to be able to go, okay, this is a suicidal thought. And if I reach out to one of these many services. So I think that's a really, really important point. And thank you for raising that. In terms of the subject matter of suicide itself, I'm really keen to try and debunk some myths with this as well. And I think that if people are feeling or having thoughts, whether they're intermittent or whether they're prominent or they're strong or they're weak. Like, there's a myriad of different ways that people can experience this, but it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you damaged or broken. This is something that you have some control over, but also very little in other ways. These are thoughts and feelings and emotions that are swelling up inside you. So if someone is experiencing these sort of things, what would be your advice to the individuals at hand, above and beyond looking at support mechanisms and trying to find a way of getting support? Is there any sort of personal advice that you would give people?
The most obvious one is to tell somebody. Whoever it is that you trust, it's to tell somebody and to not keep it in. Because one of the biggest myths out there is that it's weak to speak. In actual fact, it's the complete opposite. It shows huge amounts of courage and bravery if somebody takes that huge step to actually tell someone they trust. That could be your partner, it could be your mum and dad, it could be your mate, it could be your neighbour, it could be your work colleague, whoever it is that you feel comfortable opening up to. It's so, so important that you let them know how you're feeling, because you will often find that once you have taken that step to open up about how you're doing, you'll feel like a weight's lifted off you. And that person is often wanting to help you get through it. So that's the biggest thing is please talk, and don't feel in any way, shape or form that you are burdening somebody, because believe me, we'd much rather hear how you're feeling and you still be here than you bottling it up and thinking you're a burden and not being here. Yeah,
I agree. And having been in active rescues before, you hear all of those things come out, don't you? Like, oh, you're too busy. You don't need to be dealing with this. You probably got somewhere better to go. I shouldn't feel like this. I'm not a girl. All of these sort of things.
Yeah.
They come out in almost like verbal diarrhea, and you sort of sit there and you have to shoulder those and go, okay, cool. So let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah. And you've just touched on something else there as well, Kris, which is, I shouldn't feel like this. Now, you might be sat there in your life thinking, I've got a family, I've got a nice car sat on the drive, I've got a house, I've got a roof over my head, I've got a job, things are great. Why am I feeling like this? I shouldn't feel like this. Mental health just doesn't discriminate. And it doesn't matter what you've got, how much money you've got, how good your job is, how nice your car is, how amazing your family is. You can still be impacted by mental health and suicidal thoughts. And that's okay. You can't help that. It is what it is. It doesn't discriminate, and it can happen to any one of us at any point in our lives. And I think that's really important, because however well you think you might be doing on the surface, it might be very different inside.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a big perspective, isn't it? You can have everything. You can have money. You can have all the extrinsic motivators, the money, the house, the car, the perfect family, etc. But if something's not right in your head, if you don't feel right in yourself,
exactly,
it's the same with diabetes or cancer. You don't get control over it, to a certain degree with health and well-being and hygiene methods. But if you're going to get hit by illness, you're going to get hit by illness. It's exactly. Equal opportunity mongrel, right? It is everyone the same, irrespective.
Exactly that. So however you're feeling, it is valid.
Yeah. And acknowledging that and being prepared to ask for help. And please do ask for help, because irrespective of your position in life, if you're having struggles personally or professionally or financially, those problems can be resolved. Irrespective of how they get resolved or what time it takes, there are resolutions that don't involve you harming yourself or harming others. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And it's hard when you're in that moment, when you're feeling heightened and you're feeling anxious and emotional, but understand that feeling does pass, and reaching out to someone, grabbing a lifeline and just working with them whilst that feeling passes, so that you can get an opportunity to take a deep breath and think differently, is really, really important. You're not going to be stuck in that state for absolutely ever. And I think that's a really, really important thing to mention, especially when it feels so real and present at that moment in time.
Totally.
So in terms of supporting others then, I think one of the myths with suicide is that if you talk about it, it will put ideas into people's head. And we know that scientifically that's been proven. It de-escalates the risk. So that to one side. I think one of the challenges are sometimes the subtle nuances that you might miss. What advice would you have for others who may either A, not know, or B, suspect but aren't sure that they should be looking out for in terms of changes of behavior with others?
So this can be really, really varied, and there might be some changes that are really evident and some changes actually that are really subtle. Sometimes there might not be any changes at all. I think that's important to say. I'm going to use my brother as an example here because I look back on some of the signs potentially that he was struggling, and frankly, I missed them because I didn't know they were signs and I wasn't educated in this topic. And that's something I will forever live with. So a couple of examples. His sleep was very odd. I would quite regularly get WhatsApp messages from him at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't think anything of it. I thought he'd just been out on a night out, as a 21-year-old young man would do. Didn't think anything of it. In actual fact, he wasn't sleeping. But then if I tried to contact him in the day, I couldn't get hold of him because he was asleep. Sleep patterns being off is absolutely a symptom or a sign. You might be sleeping too much. You might be sleeping too little. You might be sleeping at odd hours. That potentially could be a sign. Another sign that my brother was displaying was he lost complete interest in his appearance completely. He was once very, very concerned about how he looked. He'd gel his hair to the exact strand. He'd wear the latest gear. He'd want the latest trainers. He'd be smelling great with aftershave. You know, he really took care in his appearance and wanted to look good. However, in the few months really leading up to him ending his life, it just went out the window. He shaved all of his hair off. He was wearing clothes that he clearly hadn't washed, joggers and an old t-shirts, just not interested, completely lost his interest in his appearance. And actually, again, I look back and I think, what did I think at that point? That he was a bit lazy, that he just hadn't put a wash on that week. In actual fact, probably to him, the thought of having a shower, the thought of putting a wash on, the thought of taking the time to gel his hair was just stuff it was just out of reach. They were two mammoth tasks for him to actually take on because he was struggling so badly with how he was feeling. Other subtle signs, you know, selling all of his possessions, going on Facebook Marketplace and eBay and putting his iPad up for sale, putting various PlayStation games and so on up for sale. Why was he doing that? He was preparing potentially for him to take his life. So these are all things that was out there and I didn't recognize and I didn't know that they were potentially signs. So I think the best advice I can give you here, and it goes back to that myth, talking about suicide puts the idea in their head. It doesn't. And look, it's hard. You'll probably be panicking inside when you ask somebody because you don't want to hear the answer. But the reality is here, it is so important that if you are worried about somebody and you think, do you know what, I'm concerned about how you might be feeling, please ask them, are you experiencing thoughts of suicide? They might say no, but they might say yes. And if they do say yes, that is an enormous weight lifted off of their shoulders and an opportunity for them to open up that dialogue with you around what's going on for them and how they're actually feeling. And it's then opening the door really for you to be able to signpost and get them the support that they need. But it's so important that you ask the question, however hard and however tough that might seem, you could save a life by doing so.
Yeah, and that's really important to recognize, is that this is a really strange analogy, and I hope that it works in the way that I expect it to. But if you go through Mackie D's drive-through, right, they'll say, do you want to go large? Would you like to go large for an extra 50p or 50 cents, right? And you, most of the time, will probably say yes, because you've been asked that question. And I think that we have to be prepared to be able to shoulder the responsibility of being able to hold that space by asking that question. Because if the question doesn't get asked, people aren't able to respond. And it might be that you've got it completely wrong and the person's just having, you know, perhaps they have been out all night and it was a great party and everything is happy and rosy in their life. And they might turn around to say, no, mate, like, of course I'm fine. Like, And then you can go, would you like to talk? And they're like, no, honestly, like chill, I'm all good. There is nothing wrong with being wrong about this, but can you imagine what happens if you are right? And the weight that's released off of people, right? You don't need to worry about looking like a dick because someone says, no, actually, you got this completely wrong. I'm perfectly fine.
100%.
So,
Yeah. And I love the McDonald's analogy. I'm going to use that going forward.
Sorry, that's how my brain works. And then we spoke offline.
I love that. I love that. I think that's something that I'm gonna use as well, because you're completely right. You'd rather look like a dick and ask the question and be put back in your box than not ask and that person takes their life.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the signs that you mentioned that were perhaps a little bit more obvious after the sad loss of your brother, I think the hardest thing for us to try and educate and train on is sometimes just gut instinct as well. As human beings, we know when something perhaps isn't quite right, but often enough, we've learned to just push it down and go, probably just one of those days. But I think that if you have any inclination, and it could just be you're walking past someone on the underground and they're sat there with their heads in their hands, don't hesitate to stop and say, hey, are you all right? Would you like any help?
That could literally be the difference between that person being here or not. It's literally as simple as that. I just think if I knew then what I know now, potentially I still have my brother here.
So I'd like to we're coming to the end of the podcast, but I think that we always talk, or we often hear talk about how do we support those who are struggling with thoughts or feelings of suicide. But what I would like to ask you is, have you got any words of encouragement for those who are perhaps have experienced a loss due to suicide? Have you got any encouragement for individuals who might be either going through that currently or have gone through it previously? Because I know that there's a lot of weight with the fact that we didn't know any better. We weren't able to look at the signs. And I think that there has to be a permission given to people to say, it's sad, but you couldn't do anything about it based on the knowledge and your experience, etc. at the time. Have you got anything for families that may be struggling with this?
It's a really difficult one because, as anyone bereaved by suicide will know, the feelings that come with that are very different to loss by natural causes. Very, very different. You've got so many additional things to deal with. You've got the guilt, you've got anger actually as well. So many times that if Josh was here, I'd give him a clip round the ear, to be honest. You've got sadness, immense sadness. And then you've obviously got all the feelings of loss and grief and so on as well. In terms of support available, there's a couple of resources that I just want to signpost people to, I think, if you are bereaved by suicide, because they helped me. The first one is a charity called Suicide & Co. And they are a charity and they offer a certain number of free counselling sessions for people who have been bereaved by suicide. And the counsellors are trained to provide support for people who have been bereaved by suicide. When I first lost Josh and I tried counselling, my counsellor, frankly, was talking to me like I'd lost my 90-year-old grandparent, not my 21-year-old brother. So it wasn't helpful to me. But going to an organisation where it is very specific to suicide grief was useful. So that's a great charity that I'd recommend checking out. You've also got SOBS, Survivors of Bereaved by Suicide. That is a group that you can connect with, all of which the members in the group have been bereaved by suicide. Talk about your experiences, share how you're feeling, share how your week's been, share what you've got coming up. And it's a way of connecting with other people who get it. Because as much as people try their very best to understand and get what you're going through, unless you've been bereaved by suicide, you simply won't know. Simple as that. So I've met people through SOBS myself, where I've connected with other sisters who have lost younger brothers. They know exactly how I'm feeling, and that is actually quite comforting at times as well. But I think in general, as well as those two resources that I've just signposted to, in general, my biggest advice is please make sure that you are looking after yourself as much as you can. I'm still learning how to do that. I'm not going to sit here and preach to you and tell you that you need to go into ice baths and do 10K runs every day and all the rest of it, because I don't do any of that. And I'm still learning myself how to deal with it. But you've got to take time for yourself. However that is, you do that. So for me, if I'm struggling and I'm having a bad day, it's a pizza and Netflix day under the duvet. That does it for me. For you, it might be the ice baths. It might be a run. I don't know. But just do whatever you can to make sure that you're looking after yourself, because you yourself are vulnerable if you've been bereaved by suicide.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually. I've often heard that. Is that the case in terms of, is there a natural curiosity there maybe, or how does that come about?
If you've been bereaved by suicide, you're 67% more likely to take your own life than somebody who's died by natural causes.
Right.
Which is huge, which is absolutely huge. It's to do with the trauma of it and often the guilt, actually, behind it as well. You know, could I have done more? Should I have said this? Could I have done that? If I'd have done this, it might have been different. There's lots and lots of that goes on when you lose somebody by suicide. And unfortunately, it does result in people also taking their life. So if you have been bereaved by suicide, you are yourself very vulnerable. You need to make sure that you're looking after yourself, and you need to make sure you're getting the support that you need in the ways that, you know, that we've spoken about on this podcast. But it's so important.
Thank you. And I appreciate you sharing. I know it's our line of work, right? It's what we do, but it's also challenging. And I hope that you do spend some time underneath a duvet or grab yourself something really nice and be a little bit selfish after this, because you deserve it. And, you know, I really appreciate you sharing the information.
Thanks, Kris.
Finally, from my perspective then, so Ripple, the platform that you've developed, the platform that is saving people all over the globe, how does it work? How do people access it, and why should they?
Yeah, okay. So Ripple is a piece of tech, and it can be downloaded in two different ways. The first way is as a browser extension. So you can put it on your browser of choice, whether that be Safari, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, whatever it is you use. Once downloaded, it means that if a harmful search is conducted on that machine to do with self-harm or suicide, the Ripple technology would interrupt and intervene on that search and instead signpost them to a plethora of mental health support services. We can also now put Ripple on Wi-Fi. So anywhere that's got a Wi-Fi network, train stations, football stadiums, coffee shops, shopping centres, airports, anywhere that's got a connection with Wi-Fi, we can put Ripple on there. And again, it means that if any device is connected to that Wi-Fi network and conducting a harmful search, we can intervene and signpost to support. This is completely free for everybody apart from corporates and businesses. So parents at home who've got kids, download this at home. Schools, colleges, universities, completely free to safeguard all of their students. Other charities, completely free to safeguard your staff. And for businesses and corporates, we charge them a subscription fee based on the number of machines that they're deploying Ripple onto. And it starts as little as 13 pence per machine. And ultimately that keeps us running, keeps us going.
Thank you. And so in terms of scale, you mentioned Wi-Fi networks. Has that been successful? I mean, it should be.
Yeah.
What an absolutely tremendous way of being able to protect people. How's that going so far?
Yeah, it's going well. So, for example, we've entered into a partnership with Network Rail. So I believe it's just under 20 of the biggest stations up and down the UK have Ripple on their Wi-Fi, which is just amazing because, as we know, unfortunately, train stations are a location in which a lot of people choose to go. So if we can intervene and let them know that there is a much better option here for you through the Wi-Fi, that can only be a good thing. We've also got a number of football clubs who have now signed up to Ripple as well and have put it on their stadiums and on their training facilities and so on. My club, West Ham, have got it, but we've also got a few other clubs now as well. Bristol City, Leeds United, Sunderland, the FA are in a partnership with me to get this on Wembley for when England play, which just blows my mind. And despite me being a West Ham fan, I've even partnered with Chelsea coming up in the next few weeks. So it really is for everyone.
And there's no fucking excuse. If it's free, God, reach out to Ripple, get it put in place. Obviously, charities are not run on thin air.
No.
And the cost of this technology is huge. So if you are inspired from a business perspective, I know that you work with Revolution Group.
Yeah, Revolution Bar. Every Revolution bar up and down the country has got Ripple on their Wi-Fi. But we need more, especially in the hospitality sector, to get on board with this, put it on their Wi-Fi, safeguard their staff, first and foremost, and their workers, but also the customers as well.
Oh my God. Yeah. And that, do you know what? We spoke about the commercial elements of doing training and putting protection mechanisms like this in place. We're not just talking about your staff. They should be your primary concern, because if they're not well, then your customers aren't going to have a great experience and you've got a really poor business. But actually, aside from that, especially when we're talking about venues that have rooms, etc., or even venues that are serving alcohol in, where you know potentially someone is going to get into a risk position, you should be aware of how to support the sheer volume of people that we work with on a regular basis, whether that's through education or through working with people like Ripple and the services that provides. There is not just a moral obligation here, but actually, you know, there's a financial obligation. There is, there's so much. Just get involved. Look for Ripple. How can people find you, Alice?
So our website is ripplesuicideprevention.com, but we're also on social media. You can find us on LinkedIn, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Instagram, or you can email us. Just email info@ripplesuicideprevention.com, and we can work with you and give you a demo of Ripple, show you how it works, give you costings, and you never know, it might actually save a life, which is really the whole reason that we exist. So we'd love to work with as many people as we can, especially in the hospitality sector.
Thank you. And do you operate outside of the UK as well?
We do. 49 countries around the world in 14 different languages.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's exactly what we need. So we'll put some links in the show notes to this as well. And you and I think, overdue a sparkling water and a coffee at some stage, and we could sit down. Maybe a decent pizza, a nice deep pepperoni. Yeah, we'll talk about how we can support with that through our interactions as well, because this is as I say, it's a very important subject, a subject very close to my heart. And I think we have an opportunity to really put a big dent in this and protect people. So thank you very much for your work in this field. Keep doing what you're doing. What you're doing is having a profound benefit to people. And I know that it's at times challenging, but you're doing tremendous. So well done and thank you.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everything that you do.
No problem at all. Thank you.